Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We are talking about recommendation letters. And joining me for this segment is my colleague, Michael Yager, who is a former admissions officer at Wheaton and St. Lawrence, but also, and I think particularly relevant for today, a former college counselor at the Baldwin School of Puerto Rico and Fort Worth Country Day. So he has a lot more insight, I think, than just the admission side on recommendation letters. Hi, Michael.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thanks. And thanks for joining us on this today because this is going to be airing next week. So late May, not all students are still in school. We just talked to Tova earlier, who's down in Georgia, and they are actually already out of school for the school year, which blows my New England mind because our kids are still staring down the barrel of another 6 weeks in school. Um, but when I want to talk about recommendation letters, and for our juniors, I think this is particularly important and something for them to be thinking about. Um, and let me start with, we wanted to talk about asking for them, but I want to back up a little bit and talk a little about what's the purpose of the recommendation letter, from your perspective.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to write letters for every student. In my case, though, being at a private school, and so it was great to be able to provide more detail, especially for some students. I think recommendation letters are critical because there's a lot more to the story than a teacher may know. And even the teachers provide that great insight of that day-to-day experience with a student, but also the counselors can provide some of that bigger context, like were there family things going on that impacted grades? Were there, health related issues? Is this a student who's just a good sibling? There's a lot of different things I think that can be brought to the table through recommendation letters that colleges really appreciate and value. They want not only great students, but they want great citizens that are going to be in their campus community. I think for a lot of students, recommendation letters can bring that extra oomph to their application.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I thought they were so important when I was working at Penn, and I think they're really valuable to the students I work with on the other side of the desk. But here's a question: do all colleges require teacher recommendations?
No, there are a few places where if asking for a recommendation letter is going to create a massive amount of anxiety, or if there are other things in your life that you feel like you want to apply to specific schools that it's not required, you can definitely find them. I was just reading an article in the Chronicle the other day just talking about the value of recommendation letters in general, and I think that's up to each institution as far as how much weight they want to put on recommendation letters. Does it provide something that's specifically valuable to what that institution is looking for? And so if you're a student who's out there looking for places that don't require them, they exist. Obviously, the UC system would be the biggest one, and then there are other schools that are out there that don't necessarily require them.
Yeah, I would say for my son's application process, almost none of the schools he applied to required a teacher recommendation. So they did require a counselor recommendation, but not a teacher recommendation. So my experience has been the bigger state schools, not all of them, but many of them will not require those because they're not staffed to read them. I think that's what it ultimately comes down to, right? Not that they don't want more insight, but they just don't have the capacity to take in more insight and process it in a way that's useful in the way that they do admissions at those schools.
Yeah, and even smaller schools, reading through 2 or 3 or 5 recommendation letters can be really taxing on an admission office that's already strained, depending on where they are in the cycle and how application numbers are looking in that particular year. And so I can definitely see a lot of institutions just not having the bandwidth or the capacity to place any kind of value on letters.
Yeah, I will. And even, when I was working at Penn, I was reading the main essay. There was a why Penn essay at the time that I was there. There were two short answers. We required a counselor letter. We required two teacher letters. That's a lot to read. And then you mentioned the 2, 3, or 5. I will tell you, if a student submitted 5 letters of recommendation, I did not read 5 letters of recommendation, and I also usually would make a mark like submitted 5 letters of recommendation, and that was not a woohoo, an excited mark. That was a what were they thinking kind of mark. But We could touch on that in a little later in our segment today. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about, okay, you're applying to some colleges that do require teacher recommendations. What are your thoughts on how do you decide who to ask to write these for you?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I always steer students towards is who do you feel like is going to write the best letter on your
Yes.
behalf? It may not be, the class that you have the 100 or the A plus in. It may not be, it might be the class you're doing the worst in because you've shown up and you've put in the extra work and that teacher knows you very, very well. But really, it's about how well the teacher can craft your story and how well they are as a writer. And I think that's hard to discern for a lot of students, but you can tell who comes to class every day organized, who writes well as a teacher when they're responding to your work. And so I think there's definitely some strategy in thinking of who's going to write the best letter. There are also going to be times where you have to look, if you're looking into STEM fields and they're requiring someone from a math or a science course to write one of the letters. That's going to be something that comes into your equation, but for the most part, it's who's going to write the best letter on my behalf.
Yeah, it's just literally as simple as that. And I would go so far as to say it's almost more about who will write the best letter in terms of their thoughts on me than that the writing itself is so brilliant. And I agree, a well-written letter is always lovely, but I will take maybe it's not the teacher's first language, but they are super impressed by this kid and that comes across in the writing. I'll take that any day over the really well read, damning with faint praise letter that is sort of like has not a whole lot to say about the student themselves and therefore feels pretty generic to me. So,
Yeah, if you can, I mean, if you can sense the heart behind the letter as an application reviewer, that's way more valuable than, a fancy cut and paste, something that, an English teacher or a history teacher has done, 40 or 50 times in a season. And you're seeing pieces of that letter as a reviewer 5 or 6 times because you're looking at, multiple students from that particular school. And so I think that does devalue some of the letters that come out. And even if, like you said, if it's not as well crafted, but it's coming from the heart and it provides some good points and as far as what the student's background and preparation is, that's going to be super helpful.
yeah, no, I agree. So you mentioned in passing, if you're applying to some STEM schools, they might require a math or a science. Any other thoughts that you have on how important is it to have variety in who's writing the letters? Establishing first that baseline that both Michael and I just very clearly stated, which is go for the good letter. That's first. So, assuming you've got a few different choices for the good letter, any other guidelines that you would offer?
I mean, I'm okay if a student wants to have, like two STEM faculty from high school as part of their application, great. If they can describe who you are as a student, awesome. If you wanted to have some variety, if you wanted to add a world language faculty member, or if you wanted to add someone in the humanities or English, that's great too. I never put a big premium on where the letters had to come from as a school counselor, just that they needed to choose wisely about who they were selecting and make sure that their narrative was being told through that teacher.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I guess the only thing I would say, and again, I would go back to best letter takes precedence, but if you can avoid having two history teachers write for you, right, or two English teachers, but other than that, I think it's perfectly fine if you've got an English and a history teacher or a physics and a math teacher, go for the good letter. That is always going to be of paramount importance. All right, so we've talked about who you should ask. When do you suggest students ask for these letters?
Uh, I usually encourage students right after spring break. Faculty tend to be in a pretty good mood and everyone's kind of geared up for the end of the year. I think definitely before the end of junior year, I always encourage my students to make at least one request because there are going to be times over the next month where teachers are finishing up the year too. So if they already had APs and now you have this couple weeks where there's not a whole lot going on, some teachers will actually want to jump ahead and start writing, especially for students they know who are applying early,
Mhm.
just so they can clear a little bit from their plate for the next year for the summer. So at some point before students leave campus junior year is a great time to put in that request and make sure that the teacher knows that. I usually encourage students to let the teacher know that they're applying early, so that they can prioritize it, and it's one less thing they have to worry about as a senior coming back, when they're already going to be working on essays and maybe finalizing standardized testing, and juggling courses if they're looking at something for at drop. So to have that one piece kind of already put to rest is just a little peace of mind for some seniors.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. The other thing that I've seen happen sometimes when students don't ask soon enough is the teacher has a cap on the number of letters they're willing to write. And so they're going to write 10, and if you're not in there, then you're out of luck. I kind of agree with the teachers on that front. If they're the type of teacher that's going to get asked by a lot of students to write a letter, on the other hand, it sort of feels like, really? Could you not, like, especially if you're a popular teacher, but avoid it all and just ask early. And for those students who are already out of school, what I would suggest is emailing your teacher, either through the school system, or if you have their email because you've connected with them on assignments, shoot them an email. It's nothing that you're asking them to do immediately, but you kind of just want to get in there and let them know you are hoping that they will write on your behalf. Um,
Yeah,
which
and while
actually,
you
mhm.
while a lot of the great stuff that you did throughout the year is still fresh, I mean, teachers' memories wane a little bit over the summer too, just like it takes students a while to get back into the rhythm when they get back in the fall. I mean, for a teacher, they're going to remember now some of the projects that you turned in, some of the amazing things that you said in the classroom. And so definitely, if they've already walked out the door, an email at this point, we've been living in the virtual world for quite a while now. I think it used to be you would make this request in person,
Mhm.
and you would deliver a resume, and you would talk about the great things that you learned from them in class and pump their tires a little bit. But yeah, I think an email at this phase is more than okay.
And so that actually though brings up then my next question, which is, how do you ask? So you just shared the ideal, you go in person, but either way, what are the things that you recommend a student do when they're asking the teacher to write on their behalf?
Yeah, I think I still, I like the traditional model of, catching them after class or before class and just asking them for a few minutes and explain to them, I've really enjoyed your class. These are the reasons why I would love for you to write a positive recommendation letter for me for college. And so a lot of teachers know this is coming too, and it's not going to be a big surprise to them. And some of them, honestly, from the high school side, I remember some teachers were just waiting for some students to ask them like it was the prom. They wanted to write this particular student's letter because they were so excited to do it. And so, yeah, just having that direct conversation with them that, you're excited to apply to college, you've really learned a lot from their class, give them a little bit more detail if you can. And some of that can come in writing a little bit later on. They may ask you for an activity sheet. If they are a teacher that gets a lot of letters, I've had teachers in the past who like to make it a little bit more complicated. So they would create, a number of questions and kind of
Mm-hmm.
make you jump through all these hoops so that you could be one of those people that they would consider writing a letter on. And it safeguarded them from getting all those last minute requests because you weren't going to be able to produce what they were looking for in a short period of time, or it was going to be too
Right.
much of a pain and you were going to choose the path of least resistance. So yeah, I think the traditional request or now via email, via Zoom, anything where you can have that conversation with the teacher would be the way to go.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And we did touch on, or I touched on, how much I disliked a lot of extra letters of recommendation earlier. Very quickly, we have about a minute. In terms of extra letters, if a student is determined that they want to submit one, any advice on who make the best extra letter writers?
It's for me, it has to be someone, it's an entirely new perspective. It has to be someone that's impactful, that they've known for a long time, that's going to add some significant value to the application. So maybe it's a service organization that they worked with, or if they've been doing athletics, a coach or dance or equestrian, someone that they worked with at the stable, someone who they have spent a lot of time with and knows them outside of the classroom really well, or maybe has an academic perspective of them. But it really needs to be something that's added value beyond the one or two teachers and the counselor that are already going to be sitting in that application.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think those are great examples of who should write, and an example of probably who shouldn't write. It's a family friend who knows you, but that's if there isn't a connection beyond just the family relationship, that's not a great letter of recommendation, because all they can really comment on is your personality, and you don't have any connection to the institution, and you're not overseeing the student in any way. I get questions about that from time to time, so I want to throw out there that that's not a great idea for an extra letter. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always nice to have the counselor perspective alongside the ex-admissions officer perspective. Okay, really quickly, next week, Sally is here. She's hosting. We're talking about cutting back on some of those things that students are really involved in order to improve mental health. And we're also going to be answering your questions. So if you have questions for us, send them to us. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, these are all places where you can submit your questions to us. And don't forget, we are here every week at 3 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.